The way it's kind of remembered is really about unity because no one really told people, from higher up, you should go and do this.
In response to long-standing anger over the involuntary annexation of the Baltic states by the Soviet Union through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1940, the Baltic Way, a massive nonviolent protest organized by the Lithuanian, Estonian, and Latvian Popular Fronts, focused local and international diplomatic pressure on the Kremlin, which directly sparked independence in the Baltics from Soviet rule in the late 1980s. History books mark the invasion of Poland as the beginning of the Second World War, but few mention the event that triggered it, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and the devastation that followed for the Baltic states. On August 23, 1939, Hitler and Stalin sent their foreign ministers to draw up a non-aggression pact between the two powers. Secretly, multiple clauses were added that divided Eastern Europe into Soviet and German spheres of influence. Additionally, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia were placed under Soviet control. In alignment with these terms, the USSR invaded the Baltics in June 1940 and started deporting massive groups of people to Siberia. As the Second World War ended, over 20% of the collective country's populations had been deported. The Kremlin instituted strict communist governments in all three countries and purged many native government officials, leaving the people with no say in their governments. A massive debate was sparked by the Soviets' continued denial of the secret additions to the pact, as the Baltic people attempted to get confirmation it happened. In the 1980s, things began to change for the Baltic people. Gorbachev introduced several new policies, including Glasnost, which allowed increased communication regarding Stalinistic crimes. Perestroika, a policy concerned with restructuring and reform, was also introduced. Although the original purpose of the new policies was economic reform and growth, the slight increase of information sharing it allowed caused more talk and an increase of opposition for the current government in the Baltic states. Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States of America at the time, presented a speech condemning the Soviets for their actions against the states and declared June 14th Baltic Independence Day. Following the new policies, the Baltic Awakening began. Citizens of the Baltic states began protesting and forming demonstrations that showed their discontent for their current situation. The popularity of band anthems, rock and folk music, and prohibited flags increased exponentially as people began to openly defy the government and what is known as the Baltic Singing Revolution. In the summer of 1988, several 100,000 people gathered in each country's capital and largest cities to protest the Soviet occupation. Additionally, people came together to commemorate events such as the deportations that occurred in the 1940s. Even with the increase in demonstrations and pressure from the outside world, the Soviets remained unwavering, continuing to deny the addition of the secret clauses in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. A larger demonstration would have to take place, something that did not leave the Soviets any ability to dismiss the discontent of the Baltic people. Planning began for the Baltic Way, the biggest demonstration in Baltic history, only a month before the actual protest. 3 different informal nationwide groups, Popular Front of Estonia, the Popular Front of Latvia, and the Lithuanian Sąjūdis, came together to organize the people of the Baltics. Most communication to the people was through word of mouth. It was unknown how the Kremlin or the Soviet Union would react to the protest.
And, my mom is one of the bravest people I have ever met. And when she says I was worried, that, I really think there must have been a lot of anxiety surrounding that with, what will happen, what will they do?
The Baltic Way protest took place on August 23, 1989, or the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Even though there was limited time to plan the event, it was a huge success with roughly 2 million participants across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. As a show of unity, a song called "The Baltics Are Waking Up," sung in all 3 languages, was made for the event. The chain itself spanned over 600 kilometers, and additional demonstrations also occurred at the same time in Berlin, Moscow, Melbourne, Stockholm, and Toronto. Despite being part of the same protest, different sections in the Baltic Way had extremely different atmospheres. For example, some recall singing folk songs that had been banned for decades.
And then the chain does this other thing that people actually, they're in the chain, they look left, they look right, they see this highway, and along as far as they can see, they see everybody standing there. And then they were doing this, passing the word freedom up and down the line. And it goes where you don't see all the people there, but they're there.
Vesma Duarte, another link in the chain, remembers her time at the protest as just the sunshine and then quietness. Nobody was singing, nobody was speaking. Despite the different atmospheres, everyone in the chain was still there for the same reason: their desire for independence. The immediate result of the demonstration was the undeniable attention it got from the international community. Since the chain stretched across all 3 Baltic states, it showcased the advanced planning, stunning coordination across borders, and the clear message of the people. The Kremlin repeatedly tried to justify the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but many agreed the deportations and occupations the Baltics had experienced as a result could never be looked over. In 1990, the first multi-party election occurred in Lithuania. With people feeling represented by candidates, there was a 70% voter turnout, and the Sąjūdis candidates won the majority of seats over Gorbachev's Communist Party of the Soviet Union, also known as the CPSU. The election showcased the overwhelming dislike for the previous governing system. The Sąjūdis used their parliamentary majority to elect the first non-CPSU leader in the Soviet Union and declared independence on March 11, 1990. Estonia and Latvia continued to push for independence, but Gorbachev, repeatedly denying the secret clauses of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, deemed their reasoning illegitimate. Under Gorbachev's command, tanks and military personnel entered the area to reinstate Soviet control in the countries. Many of the Baltic peoples' peaceful protests against the armed troops went awry. In the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius, 14 civilians were killed and over 140 injured during the January 13th events of Bloody Sunday in 1991. A similar situation occurred in Latvia, called the Barricades. Civilians scrambled to create barriers around important buildings in an effort to protect the area from Soviet military. Amid rising tensions following these events, Latvia and Estonia finally declared independence in the summer of 1991. After much struggle and hostility in the Baltics, Gorbachev accepted their independence in September of 1991. The Baltic Way led to independence and growth in the Baltic states and contributed to a legacy that still continues today. It has become the example for the chain protest, a method of peaceful protesting that is still used. In 2019, protesters in Hong Kong formed a chain inspired by the Baltic events to protest China's attempt to admit them into the People's Republic of China. In separate events, chains were made in the Baltic states in solidarity with Belarus, and some protests were formed in Belarus itself to voice their opposition to the current government. While these protests have had an impact, none have managed to achieve the power and significance that the Baltic Way was able to. The Baltic people struggled for 50 years under Soviet occupation, and the Baltic Way showed all their feelings against the Soviets that had been building up for decades. In time, things improved drastically for the people of the Baltic states. Each country became a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as well as the European Union. The Baltic Way brought a pro-democracy spirit, which contributed to the eventual creation of democracies in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The event is still looked back on fondly by the citizens of the Baltic states. It has been recorded in the UNESCO's Memory of the World Register, and reenactments have occurred for the 25th and 30th anniversaries. The Baltic Way 30 was a massive success, with chains being formed in Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius, with additional festivals and celebrations being held on the same day. Even though the protests only lasted 15 minutes, the Baltic Way still had over 30 years of impact. By winning the debate over the existence of the secret clauses in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the people of the Baltic states were able to create a legacy for themselves of freedom and independence, and to write their own history in the next chapter of the countries.